Hi, thank you for joining the Art Gallery of Regina for a live online artist talk with one of Canada's most extraordinary artists, the internationally renowned Aganetha Dyck. Aganetha lives in Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg, where she joins us from tonight, but she became an artist while she lived in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. This talk is one of several events that the Art Gallery of Regina in Regina, Saskatchewan is presenting for Culture Days 2021, which provide participatory ways for the public to connect with bees as conscious and creative agents, and a long-term project that the Art Gallery of Regina is conducting with the artist Aganetha Dyck. Aganetha is particularly known for her collaborations with honeybees. Her Mennonite heritage and its emphasis on thrift are a source of inspiration for her artwork, in which she commonly gives life to broken and discarded items. She has reshaped wool sweaters into tiny shrunken effigies, used family pickling recipes to preserve buttons from the sewing factory that occupied her studio before it was a space for artists, and placed hand-crocheted doilies and broken porcelain figurines into beehives to be mended by bees. Aganetha's artworks reframe bees as conscious agents who are creative and multisensorial communicators. While empathy for insects will not be new to beekeepers, Aganetha's artworks reveal possibilities for the public to dismiss their fear and instead experience empathy and caring for all pollinators. Aganetha has been working with 10 Saskatchewan artists. We'll tell you collaboration, connecting senior artist Aganetha Dyck with selected artists, beekeepers, and honeybees in Regina, Yorkton, Swift Current, Estevan, and Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Between us refers to the distances and differences between us, especially evident during social isolation due to COVID-19. The project title also refers to the wondrous experiences that bind us together. Us in this context includes humans and non-human collaborators. Over 2 bee seasons, artists create and prepare artworks with Aganetha's guidance to be altered by honeybees, while experienced professional beekeepers supervise their contact with bees. Under the nurturing attention of beekeepers, the bees will transform the objects placed in the hive, augmenting it with frills, bridging gaps, and mending cracks with their golden wax. The surprises emerging from artists, bees, and beekeepers working together are essential to the creative outcomes of Between Us, and we are excited to share some of these surprises with you tonight. Artists participating in Between Us were selected by a committee and represent the regions served by the Art Gallery of Regina's organizational partners, Estevan Art Gallery and Museum, Now, I've told you a little bit about what Aganetha's artwork is, but I want to tell you a little bit about some of her incredible accomplishments. Since the late 70s, Aganetha Dyck's work has been shown in hundreds of solo and group exhibitions across Canada, the United States, England, France, and the Netherlands, and is collected by major institutions. Some landmarks in her artistic career include a major touring retrospective of her work organized by the Winnipeg Art Gallery in 1995. In 2000, Dr. Serena Kasjabe curated an important exhibition of Aganetha's interspecies communication bee work called Nature as Language. And in 2001, the Canadian Cultural Centre in Paris organized a survey that toured to several locations, and Dyck's work with bees has been exhibited to wide acclaim in Paris, Rotterdam, and at the Yorkshire Sculpture Park in England. She is the recipient of numerous awards, including the Governor General's Award in Visual and Media Arts in 2007. Aganetha continues to exhibit her artwork and activate interdisciplinary collaborations. Recent and upcoming exhibitions of her work are hosted by the Burnaby Art Gallery, the Vancouver Art Gallery, the Evergreen Cultural Centre, the Owens Art Gallery, and the Comox Valley Art Gallery. I'm Sandee Moore. I'm the curator of exhibitions and programming at the Art Gallery of Regina. I'm also a white settler cis woman, and I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional lands referred to as Treaty 4 territory, and that the city of Regina is located on Treaty 4 territory, the original lands of the Cree, Ojibwe, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect and honor the treaties that were made on all territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we are committed to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous nations in the spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Art galleries are safe spaces to engage in difficult conversations, including our relationships with each other, the land, and the environment, and to move towards reconciliation and healing. The Art Gallery of Regina is a public nonprofit art gallery. Despite our name, we're not a city organization, nor are we very large. Our mission is to support artists and engage audiences through contemporary art programming. The Art Gallery of Regina was founded as a satellite of the Mackenzie Art Gallery to support local artists and practices excluded from established arts institutions in the 1970s. This ethos still guides our support of Saskatchewan artists through our exhibitions, learning opportunities, and public engagement. Tonight's Artist Talk by Aganetha Dyck is free for you to join and enjoy. We will have opportunities for you to ask questions and to speak with Aganetha at the end of her talk. Please use the live chat button under the video to enter your question. Finally, I want to acknowledge the financial support of Sask Culture, which made this activity possible through their Culture Days support. The Art Gallery of Regina is also grateful to our core funders, Sask Arts and the City of Regina. And of course, your support also makes it possible for the Art Gallery of Regina to offer free and affordable to hear from Aganetha about her visionary, inspiring, and sensitive art practice. So Aganetha, when I mentioned when I introduced you that you became an artist when you lived in Prince Albert, Saskatchewan. Can you describe how you became an artist, what your earliest works were like, and what about Prince Albert made it possible for you to conceive of yourself as an artist?
Sure, that would be fun to do because we moved from Winnipeg to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan in 1972 because of my husband's work. And I decided right at the beginning that I would volunteer at the art center, where I also took courses in pottery, weaving, and batik and things like that. And then luck would have it that George Glenn was sent to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan to live and work, to teach, and to open a studio. And I took all George's classes, drawing, art criticism, life drawing. And somehow, I don't know how this happened, but George asked a group of us, including me, which was a big surprise, to join his studio. And I asked George, what am I going to do when I go to the studio? Because I'm not an artist, I'm just learning to draw. And he said, what do you like to do at home? Because you said you're a homemaker. And I said, I like to do laundry. So he said, okay, that's what you'll do at the studio. And I thought, oh, this is really bizarre, but he's a professor, so I guess I will do that. So luckily, as I was leaving the studio that first day, I passed the Salian shop, and a group of people were discarding woolen clothes, big bags of woolen clothes. And I asked them what they were doing, and they said that the new woolen clothes that were being manufactured were called superwash because they didn't shrink when you washed them. And so they were throwing out all kinds of woolen clothing that shrunk. So I thought, okay, I'll do that then. And luckily they had a wringer washer for sale at the Sally Ann, and I took all these clothes and took them down to the studio along with the washing machine and started washing clothes. I washed hundreds of woolen clothing and hung them in the studio. And George, in his wisdom, gave me the back of the studio where there was a drain, so my clothes could be on a line and be dripping down the drain. And one day George came by and he said, "What are you doing?" And I said, I'm washing clothes. And he said he really liked the shrunken clothes. They were starting to sit all over the floor. And he said, if you were in New York, you'd be famous. So I thought, well, that's interesting. And at the same time, I was an apprentice to a weaver, which meant salish weaving, which meant you purchased a fleece, cleaned it, washed it, carded it, spun it, and started weaving. And one day Margaret said, we have to go and get a fleece from the ranch. So we went somewhere in Saskatchewan, and the rancher, a woman who's probably was in her 70s at the time, and I started talking, and I said, I hate doing this. And she said, well, I'll do it for you. I'll wash it for you. I said, oh, good. Margaret didn't really approve of this, but I really hated to do it, to clean the fleece. So in the evening, I get a phone call from this lady, the rancher, and she said, I'm very sorry. But what I've done is I mixed up my clothing, my wash, and instead I threw in your fleece, and it stuck all around the agitator of the washing machine. I said, okay, I'll come down and she said, I can't get it out at all. It's stuck. So I went down to the ranch, and with scissors and a butcher knife, we cut out this huge felt structure that I thought was just beautiful. And I took it to the studio, and Margaret said, well, that's ruined. I said, not really. I said, it's all matted and it's beautiful, and I think I can do this on purpose. So that changed my whole life. I looked at that and I thought, I've got to figure out how to make felt, how to shrink things that look, like things that I'd like it to look like. And Margaret said, well, if you're going to prove that this is going to work, you're going to have to make something like a cup or a plate or something out of felt, so that you can prove that you have a system, that you have a way of doing it. So that's exactly what I did. I figured out how to make shapes using raw sheep's fleece and stopped weaving completely.
So was that rad hens, was that one of the things that you made that she directed you to purposefully make a shape, not just get the fleece stuck around the washing machine agitator?
Yeah, the rad hens were round shapes, and they kind of had a neck on them. And I made 4 of them. And when I had finished making them in the washing machine, they needed to be somewhere warm to dry. So I put them on a radiator, and I called them rad hens and gave them a purple sweater as a companion. So the purple sweater sits on the floor and the rad hens sit on an old radiator. So that was...
Your shrunken sweaters. It's so funny when you say you like to do laundry. It reminds me of when kindergarten or first grade kids are asked, what does your mom like to do? And they say something like, she likes to vacuum or she likes to do laundry. So, I mean, I think it's absolutely amazing that this, in a way, George so wonderfully pointed you to a starting point for your art practice, which is your liking to do laundry. Can you give a sense of size for your shrunken sweaters? About how big would they be? The sizes 8 through 46.
Well, most of them would make really great toaster covers, if you don't want to get dust on your toaster, or kettle covers. That's about the size that most of them are. They're quite small. They stand by themselves. They're, some might be 16 inches high. maybe by 9 inches by 9 inches. It depends how long I shrink them, Sandy. If you shrink them once, and then, you have to shrink them all day, and you can let the wringer washer go all day, and it's a mantra of some sort, and you can read while it's washing. You don't have to do anything else. That's the fun part.
Oh, that sounds actually how I try and work as an artist too. Just I click a shutter on my camera once a day, and that's my art done for the day. So George is really the reason that I'm an artist, Sandy. He was a good guide. He gave a lot of information, and he taught me how to make how to work on one idea instead of all over the place. He guided me for approximately a year, and then we were transferred back to Winnipeg, where I had a studio before I unpacked the house, because at that point, somehow I knew that, well, I should backtrack. Carol Phillips was the curator at the Norman Mackenzie Art Gallery when we were in Prince Albert. She came to the studio one day to visit George and Margaret Van Walsum, and came to see my shrunken clothes. And she said something to me that I will never forget. She said, "You're doing such interesting work now. And if you're doing that now, what are you going to be doing in 5 years?" And that's the day I became an artist. I knew that there was a possibility. She gave me this incredible feeling that I was a capable person. And she gave me my first solo exhibition, which was downstairs at the Norman Mackenzie Inn, I think, which was the student gallery. I'm not totally sure. Okay. Then we moved to Winnipeg, and I got a studio, and it was on the 5th floor of a building right downtown near Portage in Maine. And one day I went to the studio, which was on the 4th floor. I should backtrack again, where I was sharing studio with 4 other artists. And I met this very handsome gentleman who was dressed beautifully. And he was coming up the stairs, and I was going down, and he said hi and asked me what I was doing. And I said I was an artist. And he said, "Are you looking for a new space by any chance?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I'm moving out of the 5th floor. Why don't you come on up and look at it?" And I thought, okay. So I went upstairs, and here he was, a button manufacturer and button dyer. And he had, I'm not kidding you, millions and millions of buttons that he wanted to sell me for $500. And I could have the space for $35 a month. It was 1,200 square feet that I could have, no, 3,600 square feet. So I jumped at the chance. I went to the bank to get a loan for $500. And the bank manager phoned my husband and said, "Your wife is at the bank and she'd like to borrow $500. What do you think?" And he said, "Well, it's up to her, isn't it?" So I borrowed $500, paid for the buttons, and moved upstairs. And that's how the canning of the buttons happened. Wow. I mean, what did you say your rent on that space was? $12 a month?
$35.
Oh, $35 a month compared to $500 for these buttons. Like, it's a buttons. huge expense.
It was a huge expense for me.
I mean, I think it's amazing, all these experiences you've had only in 1 year in Saskatchewan, to have George Glenn telling you, you would be famous if you were in New York, to meeting Carol Phillips, who was then the director of the Mackenzie Art Gallery, and her seeing and appreciating your work. What an amazing way to kind of become an artist. And I think one of the things that really strikes me about how you work as an artist is so many people are afraid about making mistakes, and they don't want to embarrass themselves. And you really love when things go wrong. It seems that's what's inspiring to you. So I'm wondering if you can tell me, what does embracing imperfection bring to your artworks?
Well, it all happened, I should say, when I became an artist when I was 37. So I remember I went to the Y. This was before we went to Prince Albert, but I have to tell you, I went to take a course that was called Completely Terrified to Draw. And it was taught by a woman who at that time I thought was very ancient. She must have been at least 60. And she told us this story. She said that what you have to learn to do in life is to walk through life like a sieve. And you open your arms and you walk through life and you only take in what you want, but you just look everywhere for possibilities. And you divorce yourself from everything that you don't like. And that's what I've done all my life. And things have fallen into place. I just look at every opportunity and ideas. And I think working with George was just the best thing that ever happened to me. He's just an amazing teacher and guide.
Yeah, I think one comment that George made to you that was so, really prescient and important is that, he said, what do you like to do? He told you to do that. And I think it's very interesting. And I'm sure that this has been taught of your art practice is that many of the techniques you apply are not traditional art making techniques, but they are what might be thought of as women's work, such as knitting, sewing, canning, preserving. And yet by doing them badly, you really subvert these things. You subvert both, people's expectation of what an artwork should be and, maybe what it is good to, what their expectations of being, say, a good homemaker might be.
Well, I don't know what kind of a homemaker I was. I think I was a good homemaker. But what influenced me with the canning of the buttons was my grandmother's and my foremother's basements that were filled with shelves of the most beautiful, colorful jars that held shapes from the garden. I didn't can, I didn't preserve, but I looked and enjoyed what all these people had done with their beautiful, beautiful basement shelves of preserves. And when I saw the buttons, the first thing I tried was my friend Winona Center from, she's in Saskatchewan now. I said, I don't know what to do with the buttons. People tell me, sew them all over your clothes, glue them on the wall. I didn't want to do that. So she said, well, why don't you bake a button pie? And she's a psychologist, you see. So I thought, okay, I'll bake a button pie, not thinking of the materials that buttons are made out of, wooden, plastic, glass, all kinds of materials that I was unfamiliar with. So I went home, made a crust and put buttons inside and put it in the hot oven. And it started on fire. And luckily my husband was on a business trip, so he didn't have to see this. But my son, who was in, I think, grade 3, smelt the burning buttons and came running down the stairs, grabbed the fire extinguisher and said, we have to hit at the bottom of the flame, Mom, to get this out. And so he got rid of the flaming pie. It was a big mess and took a long time to clean up. And I think I didn't help the health of the family at all by baking these buttons.
Wow, what a harrowing story of artistic creation. And is this your son, Richard, who is also an artist?
No, it wasn't Richard. It was Michael. And he...
You scared him off of art making with that.
Yeah, I think so. And my uncle, who was a scientist, he said, Aganetha, you have to remember something. Not everything that smells bad is bad for you, and not everything that smells good is good for you. So I always have to remember that when I was going to bake something. I also barbecued them, but when I barbecued buttons, they would shoot up into the air like 30, 40 feet and land in the grass because they would poof up and explode. So
like fireworks.
Like
fireworks.
Yeah.
So what were they making buttons out of?
I don't know. Some kind of plastic.
I mean, I think this is such an amazing spirit of experimentation, honestly, recklessly trying everything.
Everything.
And, when we come back to the canning and you talk about, these shelves full of beautiful preserves from the garden in your mother's and your grandmother's pantries. And many of your best known bodies of work, either they kind of transform things in, shrinking the sweaters, the hand knit sweaters, or discovering new uses for this neglected stock from a button factory and mending broken china. And in this wonderful book about your artwork, The Power of the Small by Julian Jason Sladen, he asserts that your Mennonite heritage's emphasis on thrift plays an essential role in your art practice. So not to waste things, but to mend and repurpose. And I'm wondering if you think that this, either Mennonite heritage or just maybe being raised on a farm where you kind of are always making do and repurposing things, if that plays into how you work as an artist.
Oh, I'm sure it does. I haven't really thought about it very much, but my mother and my grandmother would dress us in, remaking of adult clothes into children's clothes. My father was a welder and he would weld interesting shapes. And one thing that he did that I think has influenced me a lot, which I don't know how, but after the Second World War, the farmers were offered bomber airplanes, small ones, to use, materials, to use the materials that the airplanes were made out of. And I watched my father, take wires out, cut the sides of the airplane into another shape. And also it was our playhouse for a long time, this airplane. So I think things like that, everything seemed to be in some kind of movement on the farm. It was, if they weren't taking something apart, they were putting something together that didn't seem to make sense sometimes. But it was, everything from a butchering bee to, I don't know, it was just, the activity was incredible. It was, and I loved all of it, except I didn't like the barn or anything to do with it. But I'm scared of chickens and cows. So
And yet you made the rad hens that are warming their little bodies up on their nest box of the radiator.
Oh yeah, chickens are very scary.
Yeah, if you've had to go in, reach underneath and grab the eggs, you can get that.
I used to bribe my sister to do it for me. Yeah. So I guess it did have a big, I'm not afraid to take a material and use it for whatever. Like, it all makes sense when I see something that I can turn into something else. It was done all my life as a kid.
I can see being surrounded by so much inventiveness and resourcefulness. And it also strikes me that you have a real empathy for things that have been discarded, that, I don't know if materials speak to you, or if when you go to the thrift store, you see things that say, take me, transform me.
Sometimes, yeah. And
sometimes the choices almost seem idiosyncratic. You've got one body of work that deals with these beautiful, delicate porcelain figurines, another
Yes.
one with sports equipment and with clothing. You know, how do you have a sense of what guides you to kind of choose these objects?
Well, the sports equipment began with a simple newspaper article where people were bemoaning the fact that artists were receiving funding for working. And on the same newspaper, not the same page, but the same newspaper, they announced the wages of hockey players, and I was trying to put that together, you know, receiving a grant and receiving a wage and all those things. So I started collecting discarded or secondhand sports equipment and decided to turn an apiary into a gallery. And at the same time, I was having a show at the Winnipeg Art Gallery. And at the same time, the St. Norbert Arts and Cultural Center offered me a studio, and a beekeeper was there, and one thing led to another. And my husband and my son, Richard, and the beekeeper, Phil Beltus, created an outdoor gallery of using 9 hives in a clearing in the woods. It was just a beautiful spot. And in each of the 9 hives, I placed different sports equipment. And then I decided, well, if it was going to be a gallery, then we needed a director, which would be the beekeeper, and I would be a tour guide. And we advertised on radio and TV that people could sign up to view this gallery and to see the artists, the bees, transforming sports equipment. So there were tours every day.
Sorry to interrupt. Is this Sports Night in Canada?
It's Sports Night in Canada, yes.
And instead of using a traditional gallery pedestal, like what you can see behind me, there were what's called supers, the boxes that beekeepers use to keep the bees in, and those were used to display the artworks, right?
That was like a plinth in the gallery, yes. Yeah. Of course, the hives were closed because the bees work in the dark. And I would ask people to dress for the occasion. That meant no high heels, no, just to dress for the bees. And I gave everybody a net for their heads. And people toured the apiary gallery. It was quite successful. It lasted a whole summer. And I think we gave 14 tours altogether. But I have to tell you that one day after a tour, I looked up, and just outside the apiary, there was a gentleman standing there with a white cane and a guide. And the guide said to me, and let's just say his name was George, I don't know. He said, George would like to see the bees. And I looked and I thought, well, he's blind. But of course, George wanted to see the bees. So I said, well, he's really just dressed in his shirt and summer shorts, and I'm not sure this is safe. He said, oh, no, I'm not afraid. I just want to see the bees. So he came, I went to get him and took him down the path to the apiary. And he said, will you open a hive for me, please? And I did. I was terrified. I was dressed fully for the hive. I had gloves on and my whole suit and everything. And here he was standing, this blind man. And he said, can you give me your hand? After I took the lid off the beehive, which was a helmet inside, and it was covered with this brown carpet of bees. He said, please give me your hand. So I gave him my hand. I didn't know what was happening. I was terrified, as I said. So he took my hand and he gently put it on top of the bees. I don't know how he knew where the hand was. He put his other hand next to mine, and I felt the most amazing massage I've ever had in my life. And the bees did not sting me. They did not sting him. And all I could do was try not to weep. It was the most emotional time I've ever had. And he thanked me profusely and left. It was a beautiful moment.
Wow. Yeah, I even have tears listening to your story.
He was so gentle, and he was totally blind.
I think it's also interesting that a parallel occurred to me, that this man was able to see through his fingers, and bees don't actually have ears, and they sense vibrations of sound throughout their whole body. So really their whole body is an ear.
It was such a gift, such a gift. Yeah, I'll never forget him.
That is amazing. I love again, this like really concentrated, productive time for you. And one of the things people always want to know about artists is, where do your ideas come from? And I'm wondering what inspired you to begin collaborating with bees. You had this kind of amazing opportunity at the St. Norbert's Arts and Cultural Center. And I think, I'm not sure if this is a connection as well, but when I think about preserving, and my Nana's, whenever she made jams and jellies, there would be this hard disc of paraffin wax in the top that you had to pry out before you made it. So I'm wondering if there's moving from the canned buttons to collaboration with bees, if there's a connection there as well.
Yes, there is. What happened was, when I was canning the buttons, and as you said, pouring wax on top to preserve the buttons, I ran out of paraffin wax. And it was a time where canning was big in the city, and in the province. So somebody said, well, go to the bee co-op in Winnipeg, and I did. And when I went just to purchase wax, and when I went there, I looked and noticed there was a sign made by bees, and it said Bee Made Honey, which was the name of the co-op. And the sign was approximately 6 inches deep. And when you stood back, you could really read in honeycomb, Bee Made. I still feel like I just stopped in my tracks, and I thought, what is this? And I asked, and they said, Gary Hooper from St. Rose de Lac makes signs for people. And if it's your birthday, he would say, happy birthday, Sandy. And he would give the bees a piece of wood. And on that wood, he would get the bees to write you the text, happy birthday, Sandy. And within 2 days, I was at Gary Hooper's in St. Rose de Lac to learn what he would share about his signs. It just happened overnight. I cleaned up my studio. I knew, because of the depth of the text and because of the hexagon shapes and how it was so magic, I knew that I had found my collaborators and my studio mates. I had no idea why, but meeting Gary and spending a half day in his kitchen as he explained to me how he got honeybees to make text. I still all get all excited because, of course, I was most grateful, and came home and emptied my studio of everything I had been doing, all the canned buttons and everything. That was the end of that. I started researching at the library. And the first day I was researching at the library, this is where, when you walk through like a sieve, walk through the world as if you're a sieve. I looked up, and there was St. Norbert Arts and Cultural Center, 2 of their workers. And they said, what are you doing, et cetera, et cetera. And I told them, I said, I need a beekeeper. They said, well, Phil Veldhuis, a beekeeper, has just moved on to St. Norbert Arts and Cultural Center. He's a young beekeeper. Would you like to meet him? So I said, yes. They contacted Phil, and they said, would you like to work with an artist? And he said, I don't know. So I met Phil the next day in St. Norbert. It all happened within a week. And Phil and I got along really well. And he said, yes, I'll work with you. And he taught me how to behave around a hive. Oh, it was, I started to just, I don't know, the two of us just talked and talked about what could be possible. I don't know how it led to me creating this glass dress, a glass wedding gown. I had no idea, but I knew I wanted the bees to work in glass because of the beauty of their work. And so I went to the glass, to a glass designer's place and asked one of the workers if she could create a glass wedding gown for me, 5 panels and a strapless bodice, which she did. And that led to my husband and Phil talking that we needed a giant hive for this dress. Like, it all happened so fast. I don't know how to tell you that.
You really jumped in with both feet. You know, by chance, you met the people from St. Norbert's Arts and Cultural Center. They said, hey, we've got a beekeeper. Mm-hmm. And then an enormous dress. How long did it take the bees to create this wedding dress?
I think it was 9 or 10 seasons. It was
basically 9 or 10 years.
Yeah, because so the hive had to be, really large. I started by getting the bees to work in sections and then put the sections together, and then the hive kept growing until it held the whole structure of the dress. It was...
Yeah, like I think a normal beehive super, it's maybe about 12 inches.
It's 9 by 18, about 9 by, 9 feet high by, no, I mean 9 inches.
9 inches, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little box.
Yeah, and this dress is basically a life-size dress. So it was like, making a beehive super that's about 6 times bigger than normal.
Right, it was a very large hive.
Amazing.
And my husband,
Well, when we started talking about the project between us, and you say so many profound and memorable things, but you said one thing that really has been, I think, kind of a guiding mantra for all of our participating artists and beekeepers, that there are always surprises. And I think that, when the bees are going to kind of do what they want, and I think the bees maybe surprised you a bit with the wedding dress also.
Well, they liked it because they like to fill hollows, and they like to mend things. So the panels of the skirt, for instance, they just loved that space. They just filled it. It was like another hive for them. It just worked. It just, they just took to it. I didn't have to do anything except give them the glass. It was just an amazing adventure. Yeah.
Wow, it's so amazing. Maybe we can just have a quick look at also some of the images from the pond at SNAC, St. Norbert Art Center. Were you also producing these pieces at the same time?
I think so. It was because I had other things happening in the hives, because this large hive was the main structure in the apiary, but then I had another 7 or 8 hives working on things for the extended wedding party. Like there was handbags and the groom's outfit and gifts for the bride, and all kinds of things were going on. I'm sorry, I forgot what you asked me. Because the pond.
Yeah.
And then somebody, I don't know how it happened. I think the pond had these stones in it that where frogs would gather, or I don't know. I looked at them and I thought, they need something. They need sculpture on them or something. So one thing led to another, and I offered to create objects that would sit on these stones and reflect in the water. It was very beautiful. It was, I took yellow ladies' high heel shoes and created sculpture around them and gave it to the bees, and they altered it into something that didn't resemble a shoe or anything, but it allowed them to build inside the shoe, around the shoe, and they were very beautiful in the pond among the reeds and I think there were about 10 sculptures in the pond.
I love that you looked at these stepping stones in the pond and you thought, these are kind of pedestals. I'm going to make these into pedestals to display my artwork.
That's
and
right.
Not only were you collaborating with the bees to make these sculptures, but I feel like the pond, as you said, the reflection of the pond that kind of doubles the sculpture and creates more for you.
It was like working in glass, you know. It was so beautiful. And the frogs would go on there, and the bees, and you know, I don't know, all kinds of birds would come and sip from
sculptures for the frogs.
It was very beautiful.
You also said something else that I think is so memorable and such a wonderful thing to kind of keep in our hearts and minds as we're all working. But I think, again, it really guides you. When you were talking about working with bees, you said there are no secrets. There's only collaboration. And I think it's important to recognize that artists are never truly creating their work alone. But can you tell me about some of your human or non-human collaborators or projects that are particularly memorable? Maybe Richard's Bee Hive Scan story, or Di Brandt's poem to bees?
Oh, Di Brandt. I commissioned Di to write a poem to the bees. And she was writing. She had a residency at St. Norbert Arts and Cultural Center, and we met and talked. And I asked her if she would write a poem to the bees. And that was really an interesting, it wasn't really a collaboration with Di. Di was collaborating with the bees. She was getting to know them. And her and I spent time in the apiary. I don't think she'd ever done that before. She learned how to, you know, I gave her a bee suit, and she started the smoker, and the whole, it was like working with this amazing person who has a way with words. And there she was among the bees, all dressed up, looking at them, visiting them. And we talked, and she eventually wrote this amazing poem, and then Everything Goes Bee, which is now being turned into music. So we're still working together.
And did you also make a Braille version of her poem, or was that other writing that you made a Braille version of that the bees then kind of added their own little wax dots to?
No, I asked Di if I could give the poem to the CNIB to have it transformed into Braille. And then I put one line, I think there 17 lines, I'm not sure. I took little pieces of wood And on there, I had the CNIB transcribe the poem into Braille on Braille paper. And then I waxed that onto these little boards. So I gave that to the bees. So if you can imagine a poem, a line of the poem, that the bees worked on. And I'm kind of going all over the place here, but what happened was the bees altered the poem with their honeycomb marks. So I invited the CNIB to send viewers to come and read the poem as it had been transcribed by the bees. And the people came to see the show that were all blind. And when they tried to read the poem, they were laughing so hard because, of course, the words had all been changed by the bees. And what they told me was, the blind people told me, that the six-sided honeycomb, that a Braille alphabet is begins with 6 dots. And that they found so many similarities between how the bees work and how they read. It was quite an emotional tour that Serena Kisharje and U of M staff and the blind people took.
Yeah,
in
that
fact,
sounds
it was.
amazing. Erin, can we pull up an image of Poems for the Bees?
And one of the people that was like, I also had other things in the gallery, and I said, the only people that can touch any of my art from the bees are people from CNIB. So one beautiful young woman said to me, Aganetha, this particular piece I'm holding doesn't work. It's really not a good work. And it was the piece that I had struggled with for a long time, whether I should put it in the show. So I removed it because she was correct. It was another wonderful tour of the people that can see differently than sighted people do.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, it was another gift by people who just have other things to teach us.
Well, speaking of teaching, of there being no secrets, only collaboration, you are now working with 10 Saskatchewan artists and collectives to share your knowledge and methods of working with bees. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what it's like for you to mentor these artists and, have them share their questions and their work with you. And I'll just list their names here too, and we'll look at some of their creations. Kelly Litzenberger, Hannah Yokozawa Farkertson, Lass Birds, Chantal Schultz, Melanie Monique Rose, Jeff Meldrum, Sylvia Thompson, Tim Moore, Judy McNaughton, Nicole Charlebois-Renas, Denise Flamen, and your first art teacher, George Glenn, who actually started a pilot project with us in 2020. And right now we're looking at Melanie Monique Rose, who is a fiber artist, and her projects that she's put into the hive and pre and post transformation over the summer.
Well, I have to tell you something. The way these people have been working, I find it very hard that they haven't been working with bees most of their lives. I just kept thinking, well, how is this possible? It took me 20 years. And here they are collaborating with these tiny little creatures out in the apiary. It was mesmerizing to watch them and to listen to them, to each and every one of them with a different idea. I was blown away.
That is also what strikes me, that every artist had such a different approach and idea for how they wanted to collaborate with bees. Right now, we're looking at a sculpture by the Salt Coast, Saskatchewan artist, Hannah Yokozawa Farkertson, who is a self-taught quilter and fiber artist. And she made this sculpture here. And it's also interesting that they're really experimentally so much the same as you did, jumping in and saying, I normally work with sewing. What if I give some sugar-coated strings to the bees? What will happen?
She asked me what would happen. I said, I have no idea. It was funny.
And I have to say, these artists are amazing, and their beekeepers are also amazing.
The beekeepers.
Yeah. And the bees. I mean, look at this sculpture is completely almost encased in beeswax. Unbelievable.
Yeah. And the beekeepers had so many ideas. The artist would say, what about this or that? And I said, ask your beekeeper, because it was kind of it was complicated, but the beekeeper always came up with an answer. So the collaboration isn't really, it's with the bees and the artists, but it's also with the beekeepers. And I really don't know what I did all summer. I mean, I tried. It just seemed like they were, like you said, jumping in with both feet. It was such a surprise. I thought it would be totally different. So I'm amazed. I'm just amazed. And there's so many ideas I wish I would have thought of. I'm not going to tell you which ones, but there were so many. I thought, oh my God.
Yes, I think all of these artists have really done tremendous work over the summer, and their bees and their beekeepers. And so many of them have written to me to say how much they have enjoyed corresponding with you, and the way that you're not just telling them, how to work with bees, but generally, you're such an inspiration to people as an artist. And I think that you are doing for these artists what George Glenn did for you, where you're telling them, well, that's what you should do then. Go for it.
Well, you can't improve on a good idea, It's just I think what surprised all of us, the artists and myself, was how the bees responded to something so foreign to them, really. And it was a good thing that the beekeepers were all on board, supportive, and had ideas of their own to guide the artist, which was an amazing help. Because the artist and I never met, and the beekeeper and the artist were close together. It was there were problems that only the beekeeper could help the artist solve. There was just no other way.
Yeah, and everyone's mind works so differently. We had lots of online meetings, and we had a wonderful entomologist, the apiarist for the province of Saskatchewan, who talked to us about bee safety, but also, what sorts of materials were safe for bees, how we could protect the bees as well. But yeah, it is amazing to me how people's minds work so totally differently. And some of our artists are working with bee sounds. They're working multi-sensorially, as I know is of interest to you.
Yeah. I'm just blown away. Yeah. It was a beautiful, beautiful summer to work with everyone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to let the slides kind of go through so that we can see the full list of the participating artists whose names that I mentioned.
Is that birds?
Yeah, I'm so grateful to you, Aganetha, for agreeing to this project and to really kind of starting the ball rolling, saying that you wanted to work with these artists. That's so exciting.
So what's on the?
This is actually Richard's hive scans.
That was where Richard took his home office scanner and put them in the beehives while the bees were working with me. And we recorded the bees, 2 bees speaking to each other. And during one of the recordings, the hive moaned, the deepest moan Richard and I agreed we had ever heard in our lives. And yet, when we listened to the recording, the moan was not there. It was very unusual. That was another time that even Richard had a tear in his eye. The moan was so moving, so incredible. And I did read that the hive does moan sometimes. I don't know.
Yeah, we should listen to those bee sounds. They're communicating and absorbing it with their bodies that are, the whole thing is an ear.
But we can't understand what they're saying.
I love that Richard is using this scanner in a way that maybe you approach washing clothes or canning. This is not how you use a scanner. And you see this movement of the hive going through the scan. It's so great.
Yeah, he had many good ideas. He scanned the Mendel too, parts of it. He scanned the outdoors. He scanned his house. So scanning the bees was a new adventure for him and definitely for me too, and the bees. But it was all done. I want everyone to know that I did not work on any project without the okay of a scientist or a beekeeper. It's something I just would never do, because you have to learn how to behave around a hive.
Right, yes. We need to think of people's safety and, of course, the bees' health and well-being and safety.
Yes.
And, I know that you say that there are no secrets, but I imagine so many people wonder how you even start with honeybees. Like, what is your first step? And in fact, we have a question in the chat. What is the most amount of pieces that you've had in a super at one time or during one summer? So how many artworks at once have you created with bees?
You mean in one super, in one box?
That's what the question is. Yeah. How many pieces you've had in supers? Oh, maybe multiple. I'm not sure. Yeah.
Okay. I know that in one hive, which was 5 feet by 5 feet, it was a tablecloth my grandma had crocheted, and I dipped it in wax and put it in this giant beehive that my husband and Phil constructed. And along the edges, I had room. There was, because it was a round tablecloth in this square 7 hive construction. And so I would put a figurine in each corner. So then there'd be this giant tablecloth, 5 feet across, and a figurine on each corner. So that was 5 pieces, but I have put up to 3 figurines into one super at a time. As long as I left enough room for the bees to, like, the bee space is 3/8 of an inch or something, but I always gave them a little more space. But you can put as many, you just don't want the bees to unless you want the bees to connect everything, of course, which they might do.
Right.
I've had
and
to
bee
cut out.
space is this little a pathway. It's like a little bee road inside the hive. So it's a certain gap that they like to leave clear so that they can move around.
Yeah, they make tunnels and they make they make all kinds of spaces for them to move around. Yes, you're correct. Absolutely.
We have another. Oh, go ahead. Yeah, we have another question in the chat, and it kind of mirrors a question that I had for you.
Okay.
So part of working with bees means offering objects to them that they will want to build up with their honeycomb. And what sorts of materials or items have you discovered that bees like or don't like? And the question in the chat is really, was there anything you really wanted the bees to work on, but they rejected?
Well, first of all, because I always talk to an expert about materials, I was advised that perhaps fur or velvet. Velvet was something I wanted them to work with. I don't know why. I think because of velvet paintings or people painting on velvet. But it reminded the honeybees of intruders, like perhaps mice or skunks or anything furry, a bear in the apiary or something like that. It wasn't a good idea, so I never did it. So I would only say that velvet I would have liked to have tried, but the bees, it's not good for the bees, so I didn't do it. And fur, of course.
Oh, yes. Yeah, and we talked about this when we started our Between Us project too. Anything that could remind the bees of a predator is a real no-no for a material. No. Don't introduce something upsetting. And are there any examples of something that the bees really took to or that they did not like at all? Say something slippery?
Well, I wouldn't give them like anything like saran wrap. That would be too dangerous for them. They could suffocate or something. I always had to think, or I always wanted to think about trying not to be any more invasive than was necessary. But the beekeeper said I was working very much like a beekeeper who puts foreign objects, which is their, the frames and everything is really not what the bees have out in the wild. Well, we don't have any more wild bees, but when they were wild, they didn't have structures like a hive. So that was really it's not a natural hive for a bee.
Right. And when you say frames, these are like, they slot in row after row, and it's a nice way for the bees to build their honeycomb and fill it up with honey. So at the end of the season, the beekeeper can just pull them out and get the honey out pretty easily.
Yes, that's right. They spin it out in a centrifugal force gizmo. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you didn't have any failures where the bees said, no, thanks, don't like that one.
Oh, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
But sometimes it was because it was a very weak hive, or sometimes, like a lot depends on not only what you put in, but also on the weather and the crops and the health of the hive and the strength of the hive. Because if you have a hive of only 10,000 bees, that's not really enough bees for a beekeeper or for an artist to work with. So you want a very strong hive of 40 to 50,000 bees in each box, in each super. So yeah, it can depend on many, many things: crops, weather, invaders, humans.
Right. Yes, and this summer was such an exceptionally hot and dry summer in Saskatchewan. So I know it was challenging for many of our beekeepers that we weren't having wildflowers blooming in the ditches, and the canola crop was experiencing a hardship here, which is normally really pivotal to beekeeping in Saskatchewan, is the canola bloom. So I am amazed that actually so many of the bees produced the honeycomb that they did for the artist collaborating with them this year.
Well, that was probably because the beekeeper gave the artist a strong hive. You know, he or she knew what was necessary, because if they would have just given the artist weak hives, nothing would have happened. Never mind the weather or anything. It was a real collaboration with the beekeeper as well as the bees and the artist. There are so many things to think about when you're working with honeybees.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Aganetha, we have another question from the chat, and they ask, do you ever find it difficult to stay with an idea or to bring a project to fruition when you're working on pieces that grow so slowly? So for example, the glass wedding dress that took 9 or 10 years, 9 or 10 bee seasons to complete. Is it ever hard to keep going?
No, because I never found it difficult to keep going on a project, because after every season, there would be so much amazing work. The only thing that was difficult sometimes was thinking, I wonder, should I take it out? Do the bees think it's ready? It was those kinds of decisions that I like the bees to have the last decision, but I don't know how that works. You know, it's a big surprise always to find out that, like, I really liked it when I had an idea that I wanted the bees to go around an object, and then I'd come and check and they had gone under it or something, or went through it, and it was a much better idea than I ever had. Like, that's the surprise that got me every single time, and I would think, oh my God, this is just so beautiful, or this is completed. You've got to tell me it's completed. It's just way above what I had expected or even imagined. So those are the surprises that collaboration allows. It's not how long it takes.
Wonderful that you're so open to the bees' ideas, because I don't think you can direct a bee. They'll never do what you want.
Very seldom. If they do what you want, it's just because that's what they wanted to do. It's not that you were so smart or that I was so smart. It was that they decided, oh, that's how I work, or that's how we work. So yeah, it was always them. And the scent and the warmth that you get from a hive. Oh my God. That's just so amazing. Like, what's not to like working there, you know?
The smell of beeswax is absolutely, it's unlike anything else.
It is.
And actually, the funny thing that I discovered is sometimes you see that pale alabaster beeswax, and then you see parts of it that are dark, almost brown. And that's dirty bee footprints, isn't it? Where they've been walking on it.
Well, when the bees create the wax, it's usually white. I think they call it virginal wax. But then, just like your white carpet in your house, you walk around it, and first thing you know, it's gray. So I think the bees walk with their different pollen, different, you know, they visited so many different flowers with different colors that the wax actually can turn very dark, or it can stay quite light.
Well, speaking of white and white beeswax, we've got 2 more questions in the chat, but I'm going to ask you this one from Holly. So she says, the wedding dress is laden with cultural associations, and it's been criticized in feminist ideas, and that workers in a beehive are all female, those bees, and you've made such a profound object. How did you decide upon the wedding dress as the form for really this first collaboration you made with bees. What led you to the wedding dress?
I was trying to think of exactly how that happened. I know that I was thinking of the hive as being female. Of course, there's drones in there. Can't have a hive. Hive can't exist without male drones that fertilize the queen bee. But I was working on the extended wedding party, and it began simply by thinking about weddings as I knew them in my generation, and how weddings have changed over weddings and what it all means nowadays. So I created this piece called The Extended Wedding Party, which allowed for a lot of different interpretations. I don't know if I'm making myself clear.
I think so, and I think I don't think you're at all refuting, what Holly's also asserting in the lead up to her question, which is, the hive is really a female place, and this wedding dress is sort of a symbol of feminine power and fertility.
Yes, it is.
So we have also a question here from Becky. So Becky has two questions, but I'm going to skip to her second question, I think, because we already talked about what bees like and don't like. And we didn't actually look at this work yet, but Becky says, I really loved your altered cigarettes. And can you share your idea or process that led to them?
Yes, I can. I remember working, that was after the canning buttons and a few other things. And the newspapers were filled with smoking and how harmful it was. And also at the same time, at least in Winnipeg, it was, people were wondering if the cigarette companies, tobacco companies were supporting the arts, whether that was a good idea or not. So everybody was talking about smoking, about that habit. And at the same time, I was walking the streets of Winnipeg. Well, that sounds wrong. But anyway, I was walking along, and these two young artists were sitting on the steps of their studio building and lamenting the fact that they had tried to stop smoking so many times in every which way they could imagine, and they still wanted to smoke. And they had this package of cigarettes, and we started talking, and they said, we just like to not be able to smoke them. So I said, well, give me your cigarettes and I'll make them so that you can't smoke them. So they gave me their cigarettes, and I went to the studio and made them into handheld jewelry by gluing and crocheting and sewing and everything all over the cigarettes. And I gave it back to them so that they could go out in public and hold their cigarette, like that. And you go out in public and you look through people through the smoke of your cigarette. But in this case, there was no smoke, and you'd have this piece of jewelry. And I decided, well, perhaps there were more people that wanted to quit smoking. So I put an ad in, I don't know, art establishments, galleries, that if you wanted to quit smoking, you could send me your last cigarette and I'd alter it and turn it into a non-smoking habit gizmo. And I thought I would get, a couple of dozen, but I got over 1,200 cigarettes sent to me from all over Canada. So I thought, oh dear, and I had promised to send them all back. So that meant I had to have a little box and
once again,
postage.
Aganetha jumps in with both feet.
But I want to say again, you were talking about thanking people for supporting the arts. And I do want to thank the Canada Council for the Arts and the Manitoba Arts Council, the Winnipeg Arts Council, and Manitoba Culture for their support for the arts and for supporting me through all my over 47 years of working as an artist. I couldn't have done it without the generous support of the various arts councils.
Yeah. I mean, it's so important. And, we were actually lucky enough at the Art Gallery of Regina to have some of our members of the Legislature Assembly come and visit our exhibition this week. And we're really grateful to all of them for coming here and recognizing the power that art has in our society to allow us to look at the world around us, to share our stories, to build empathy, and to also look and say, how can we change things and make them better? So there's a comment in the chat. We've been getting a lot of comments about how much people have enjoyed this presentation and your stories. And this one says, incredible. Thank you, Aganetha. I absolutely love the idea of bees directing that stage of the art. It reminds me of improvising as a musician.
Well, that's lovely.
And Aganetha, you also,
Pardon me?
Oh, go ahead.
No, it's the musicians and the bees. I mean, the bees are kind of musicians too, they sing, they make noise. The queen has a peeping sound when she wants to mate before she flies up into the air to mate with the drones. There are many sounds that I'm sure musicians have listened to and been able to use freely from the hive. Yeah, beautiful.
Well, I'm kind of heading towards wrapping this up because we've gone a little bit longer than we planned to, which is fine, because I think just like everyone who's put their comments in the chat, I can listen to your stories forever, but I don't want to take up too much of your time, Aganetha. And you did mention, how grateful you are to arts funders, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Manitoba Arts Council, the Winnipeg Arts Council, and Manitoba Culture for supporting your art practice. And I want to thank you for being so generous in your support of other artists, including mentoring these 10 artists and collectives from Saskatchewan to work with honeybees. And I wonder, you've also talked about the support you've received from other artists or curators, but who are the artists who inspire you?
That's a very difficult question because artists, no, I can't even answer that properly. But I'm not trying to avoid your question. What I want to say is, outside of the Manitoba provincial supporters or the Canada Council, I would like to thank the Saskatchewan Arts Board in 1975, for having the wisdom to send an artist like George Glenn with his master's degree to teach in a community and to invigorate the artists in that community. It's something that I didn't realize how much thought that went into sending George there. And I want to thank them for that. It did so much for the community and certainly for myself. But you want to know who inspired me? early on, it was oh my God, I can't even talk. Abakanowitz, a big fiber artist in the 70s, with her huge installations. Georgia O'Keeffe has inspired me. Duchamp. The honeybees. I don't know.
I mean,
Just so many beautiful artists all over the world, musicians, theater, poets. It's where do you begin and where do you end with being inspired? You never know what's coming around the next corner, and that's going to be what's going to give you your next big surprise and big gift.
Wow. Yes, amazing. And you've given us such an incredible gift just by sharing your practice. And I actually didn't know that it was through the auspices of the Saskatchewan Arts Board that George Glenn was in Prince Albert. So what a profound impact that activity by the Saskatchewan Arts Board had, and also the first arts board in Canada, the oldest in Canada.
I have no idea how it worked, Sandy. I have no idea who was instrumental. I know the late Margaret Van Walsum was very involved, but I don't know. I don't know who to give, who would get the credit for this brilliant idea. But it's like taking a residency, and it's like inverting the residency. Like an artist goes and has a residency in another country or something. Well, the Saskatchewan Arts Board kind of gave Prince Albert a residency, like by sending someone like George there. Does that make sense? It was,
yes.
Yeah, it's kind of different residency. Yeah.
Oh, it is profound, and maybe I should talk to Sask Arts Board and say, look at what this did back in the early 1970s.
Oh,
let's do it again.
Yeah, do it again. Well, I'm sure they're doing it. It's just maybe not recognized, or it's different today.
Right, yes. Well, I'm going to ask you one last question, Aganetha, and then I'm going to read out some compliments from our chat window, and then I'm going to do some more thanks. But my last question for you is, oftentimes people want to get to know an artist through their artwork. And what do you want people to discover about you and your worldview through your artwork?
I don't know if they want to discover anything. I don't know. I'm such a curious person. Maybe too curious. I have been told that.
Well, and I think that your openness, as you said, your generosity, so, your generosity with yourself to take risks, to do things that might be wrong, your openness to being inspired by everything, those are amazing things to take away. Your approach to the world really saturates your entire art process or practice.
Mm-hmm. Well, and thankfully to all the people that I've met that have said these amazing things, like how to walk through life, how to, think about yourself as a sieve, like, why? They just blew me away. I just thought, it's so amazing, so amazing. I met so many wonderful people. And thank you to George for, the amazing teacher that he is.
Yes.
Manitoba. Yeah. All the Manitoba artists.
All the Manitoba artists too. We're excited to be working with George on one of the artists participating in Between Us and working collaboratively with honeybees. But George is also going to do an online, a Still Life Sunday drawing workshop where we're going to draw one of his honeybee altered compositions in October. So we're especially grateful for George's wonderful ideas and incredible adventurous spirit, and someone who really, really loves to teach and share. So, Aganetha, I want to thank you for sharing your extraordinary art practice and your unbelievable thought process. I shouldn't say unbelievable, but profound and astounding thought process with the Art Gallery of Regina's audience over this Zoom conference and also with me. It's always such a pleasure and an honor to talk to you. And
likewise,
I just want to share with you, thank you. I want to share with you some of the comments that were put into our chat as well. From Carla, says, I love that idea, the sound of expression and survival and connection. And from Kristen and Blair, thank you for sharing so much with us, Aganetha. So some people from Winnipeg joining us. And from Holly, really enjoyable, amazing work. Thank you for your work and your generosity. And from Carla, thanks to Art Gallery of Regina and to Aganetha Dyck. So do we have, I feel like we could just go on just thanking people. Do you have anything that you want to talk about, Aganetha, before we end our online artist talk?
Not really. I just want to say that I'm really looking forward to next summer. I think that the artists that have worked this summer are really going to blow us away. And that the bees are waiting for them. And I'd like to thank the beekeepers for their wisdom and their sharing with the artists. Some of the things that the artist told me, how the beekeeper would solve a problem if their work was too big for the super or too tight in the super. It was, I don't know. I don't know how to say things properly, but I'm just so grateful to have this opportunity. Thank you. Thank you, Sandee, and all the artists. It's just such a pleasure.
Yes, everyone has been incredible. And I should say, in our thanks, that Between Us, this multi-year project, bringing Aganetha, local Saskatchewan artists, bees and beekeepers into a long-term collaborative relationship, is funded by the Canada Council for the Arts. So we're extremely grateful for their support. And of course, as I mentioned at the start of the talk, the Art Gallery of Regina is very thankful to our core funders as well as our sponsors. They really make it possible for us to do the work that we do here every day. And I think this is, the time that we have for today. Thank you, Aganetha, for kindly inviting us to share in her art practice, her story, and of course, sharing her time with us. And thank you for joining the Art Gallery of Regina for this live online artist talk, or if you're watching the recorded version, thank you for doing that as well. And of course, thank you to Sask Culture for funding this talk and our other Culture Days activities. Look for artworks created in collaboration with bees, produced in the Art Gallery of Regina's project Between Us, supported by the Canada Council for the Arts. Those will be worked on by bees again next summer and exhibited across the province and beyond in 2023. Thank you to Collective Broadcast Company, who've been kind of masterminding our entire online presentation tonight. It's been so nice for me to just sit back and chat with Aganetha. Normally, I'm the one who's also doing all the video stuff in the background. Great to, so thank you, Erin, and the rest of your team there. We really appreciate your work. And I want to invite people to enjoy our Culture Day programming and to have a creative, multi-sensory connection with bees. We'll have a participatory project. We're going to build a honeycomb flag that will be flown from our flagpole outside this building for the rest of the Culture Days month, so until the end of October, and that will be October 2nd and 3rd. It's free to join. We just ask that people pre-register so that we can ensure that everyone is safe in our space. And we're also, this is really a project inspired by Aganetha's work. So we're repurposing old clothing to become this honeycomb flag. So the way that you've often repurposed hand knit sweaters or buttons that were discarded or broken china and so on. We also have an opportunity for people to engage all of their senses. And this is something specifically Aganetha suggested to us. So it's called Sensing the Distance, Smell, Hear, and Touch Honeybee Creations. And it includes a sound recording by Aganetha's son, Richard Dyck, binaural, so a 3D sound recording of a beehive that you could listen to. You can touch actual wax honeycomb, smell beeswax, and that will be October 16th and 17th in the Neil Bulkwell Civic Arts Center courtyard. So for those of you who don't know, the Art Gallery of Regina is located in the Neil Bulkwell Civic Arts Center on Elphinstone Street in Regina. So also free to join. And as I mentioned, George Glenn will be leading an online Still Life Sunday drawing class, drawing honeybee altered compositions on Sunday, October 24th. That will be through Zoom video conference, also free. Just go to www.artgalleryofregina.ca to learn more about our Culture Day programming and all of our other activities here at the Art Gallery of Regina. And sorry, Aganetha, there's one more thanks, some more thanks in the chat from Kelly Litzenberger, one of the artists. In between us, Kelly says, thank you for being so helpful and open as a mentor during this process. Your encouragement and responses I received as an artist were a real treat, and your words have left me very happy. And Aaron has helpfully put up an image of Kelly with his Lego recreation of his skateboard shop that the bees have altered with their honeycombs. He's putting it in the hive there. It's wonderful. And I mean, what a delightful artwork. Hannah Yokozawa Farquharson also gave a whole string of hearts. Thank you so much. And
thank you, everyone.
Yes, wonderful. And a bunch more thank yous.
And I'd like to thank Joel, who put my computer into Zoom.
Yes, another member of Collective Broadcast, Joel. Thank you so much for your help. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Sandee.
Thank you. I think we're ready to say goodbye. Thank you.